right. You ready to start?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with a little history lesson. Everybody has something that triggered something in their brain to say, I like wine, or I want to know more about wine. Before you went to college for biology, way back before then, what got you interested in wine?
Well, it wasn't before college, really. It was in college. I was minding my own business, studying biology at Pomona College. I was 19 years old. I was a sophomore. And on a complete whim, I took a wine appreciation class, non-credit, from John Hager, who is still an important wine writer. He's written interesting Riesling books and Pinot Noir books, if you maybe have seen him. But he was the Anglo-Francophilic Chinese professor at Pomona College, and he taught these. He also wrote for Connoisseur magazine. He did these non-credit wine appreciation classes. I can't make this up, but I was teaching a class in the same series, and I was teaching trampoline. I was a springboard diver in college, and I had been a gymnast in high school. And back in those days, there was no women's team. So I have a letter in men's diving from Pomona College.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
I couldn't make that up. They had to buy a child size for me.
Okay.
But anyway, the letter jacket.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was a sign-up session for these non-credit classes, and on a complete whim, his table was next to mine. No one had come in yet to sign up. I put my name at the top of his list. It was a class that people loved, but it was really hard to get into.
Oh, wow.
Of course. And complete whim, put my name at the top of the list, took the class. Wine grabbed me and ran with me, and I have never looked back.
Wow.
2 years later, I graduated. 2 days later, I was in the Napa Valley. In those days, a lot of the wine regions we've come to know in the United States and California too didn't even exist. Sure. There was Sonoma and there was Napa. I showed up in Napa because it was a really exciting place at the time. It was just going nuts.
Right.
And when I got here, June of 1975, there were 30 wineries in the Napa Valley.
30 wineries. Wow.
Yeah, now there are 400,
right.
500,
Sure.
It's depending on how you count it.
So 2 days after graduation and you show up in Napa, what do you do? I mean, you obviously can't walk into a winery and like, hey, I want to make some wine.
Right. By then I knew that women didn't really make wine in those days. I felt like I needed a master's degree from Davis. And by then I knew I had most of what I needed with a biology degree, but I had managed to avoid some of the chemistry I needed as a prerequisite. So that summer I took organic chemistry at UC Berkeley at Cal. And then after that, I was working half-time in the Napa Valley at a wine shop, wine bar, and running over the hill to Davis, cleaning up some more chemistry and starting to take the wine classes in that intervening year. The next year I was in the master's program and working on my master's degree.
Okay.
So I popped out in 1978 with my master's degree and did an internship at Freemark Abbey.
Okay.
Small family-owned winery in St. Helena, very famous for its Chardonnays in those days. Did an internship there, basically. I had finished my degree, so I stayed for 8 months there. It allowed me to see most of the cycle, which was very, very valuable.
Sure.
And then there were so many opportunities for young enologists in those days that I went from there to full control winemaker at a little tiny winery on Spring Mountain called Everdun, which has long defunct, but it became Terra Valentine, and now it's owned by a bigger winery.
Okay. So you said there's plenty of opportunity for enologists back in the day. Do you still think there's those same opportunities, even though there's 10 times the wineries, or is it harder to get started?
Well, there's no question that my colleagues and I had incredible timing.
Sure.
In the first half of the 20th century, there were 2 world wars, a Great Depression, and Prohibition.
Right.
So it wasn't until the 60s that California started to climb out of all of that, and Napa Valley included. So the first new wineries in the Napa Valley were in 66, 67,
Right.
Ramadavi, Don Chapelet, and quite a few others. It was really exploding when by the time I got here in 75. So there's no question that excuse me, ladders were shorter.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. I did an 8-month internship right out of school, and then I was a full control winemaker. That wasn't necessarily good for the industry, you know.
But it would be unheard of now.
And it would be unheard of now. So
Yep.
it would be a path would be more, I would have, in those days, people didn't travel as much, but in today's world, you get your degree and then you hemisphere hop for a couple of years.
Okay.
You can get 4 vintages under your belt in 2 years. Then you look for hopefully an assistant winemaker job. You might or might not get that, but you can find a winery where you can work up to that. And then once you've been an assistant, then after a while you could hope to be a winemaker. So I would say the ladder's probably 10 times as long now.
Oh yeah,
That's
absolutely.
better for everything, really. But there just weren't enough little old winemakers to go around.
Right.
In
Sure.
1975.
Well, it's funny you talk about how many wineries there are now versus back in the 70s, and then the ones who went defunct. So our first trip to Napa was in 2009, just kind of on a whim. We were just really starting to get into the blogging and the wine tasting and whatnot, and did a couple bus tours, went out on our own. We saw 11 wineries in 3 days.
Oh, too many.
Yes, way too many. Some I don't remember. And then we just got back in August from Napa, and on our planning trip on the way out, it was like, oh, let's just look at the wineries we went to before. 8 of those are no longer around. So that just kind of blew my mind. Of 11 of those, 8 of them are no longer around. So is that always a fear for the smaller wineries to worry about getting bought out, not being able to make it? Obviously, the price of land in Napa is attractive to sell. How do you keep the big people like the Constellation Brands at bay?
Well,
it would be so easy just to say, hey, let me sell this.
Well, except then what would I do?
Right.
I'm a winemaker. That's who I am.
Okay.
But all that said, it took a good quarter century for Corison Winery to be a truly going concern.
Okay.
And it's been 10 years since then, so we just put our 35th vintage
I saw that.
The barrel.
Congratulations.
So we're a going concern. That's not to say it's not. It's a huge challenge. The wine business is very difficult. It's very risky. We're farmers. In our case, we're small family farmers. We operate on the world, in the world economy. So we buy barrels and equipment in Europe. Our wines are sold shoulder to shoulder with the wines of the world. So exchange rates, economies are extremely, we're selling a luxury good. Right. I mean, nothing could be more difficult or more challenging than the wine business in general. And I would say small family farms, it's excruciating. And partly because there are so few of us and there's so many departments. Think of a big winery, how many departments there are. Sure. So each of us has to run several departments, every single one of us. Have, I grow the grapes, I make the wine, and I run the winery on sort of a GM level, day-to-day level. My husband does the bookkeeping and accounting. He has just, he's found the properties that we've been able to procure and found, in fact, where the winery is. He designed the winery, he made it happen. He keeps everything running. He's the IT department. Wow. So think of that. That's, I think, the biggest challenge at this scale. But I'm not worried about the big wineries of the world. In fact, you won't hear very many winemakers talking about competition. Really? All do different things. And I believe any winery needs to stand for something. Any label needs to stand for something. Doesn't matter whether it's enormous or tiny. It needs to stand for something. And I think that when I was the winemaker at Chapelet for all the 80s, and toward the end of my tenure there was a wine inside of me that needed to get out, and it was a Cabernet Sauvignon that was both powerful and elegant. And so even though I made wine for other people for decades up in the mountains, Chapelet, Long Meadow Ranch, York Creek, this wine inside of me had to come from what we used to call the Rutherford Bench.
Sure.
When I started my project, there were no sub-AVAs, because my goal was to make a Cabernet that was powerful and elegant. Cabernet is going to be powerful no matter what you do, how you grow it. But it's way more interesting to me at the intersection of elegance, and power and elegance sound like opposites, but they can be in the same glass at the same time. And so I think any successful label has a reason for being. Wine speaks of place, it speaks of time. And if it's allowed to do that, no one else can duplicate what I'm doing.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And
And
you
so,
talk about the struggles of running a winery. What are the biggest misconceptions that people have? Let's say I'm driving through the valley, because I'll tell you what mine was. And probably after watching a couple movies, oh, these guys are all hanging out. They're all friends. They're all partying. They're all drinking wine. And this is just an idealistic place that everybody wants to move to.
we are all friends.
Good. Okay.
But no, it all looks very shiny from the outside. It's beautiful. It's drop dead gorgeous, especially today after frontal passage, you know, and before the leaves fall off. It's gorgeous.
Sure.
But it's like a duck, you know, swimming along, and we're all pedaling as fast as we can under the water. And it's really difficult. It's a lot of work. Harvest, for instance, is a lot of work. Those grapes have to come in when they have to come in. And so we work in a small winery here, we work crazy for maybe a month, but in a bigger winery that makes more wines from more places, it can be a couple months. It's very, very hard work, not a lot of time off. It's hot or it's cold and it's wet. It's, you know, it is not very romantic. It's still romantic to me for other reasons, but not for the reasons that show when you drive by and see the beautiful buildings and the beautiful vineyards. And wine is grown in beautiful places, but it's also made by really interesting people, usually all over the world. So I don't know. Nobody has any idea.
Oh, absolutely. I fully appreciate that. I have family. We come from a farming background. Obviously not grapes. We do corn and soybean. And people just don't understand what goes into getting that product to the grocery store, to the can, to the, you know, it's a labor of love for sure. I mean, you know, and there are years that you hate it and you're not making any money, but it's still a labor of love. And I think it's one of those things that's just bred in you.
It is so risky.
Yes.
Because we're so reliant on Mother Nature, and she comes up with something new for us every year.
Right.
And which is one of the exciting things. It's the magic. Yeah. I don't make the wine. Mother Nature makes the wine, really. But it's risky.
Yeah, sure. So I think this is probably a moot point to even ask this, but if you weren't making wine, what would you be doing? If you hadn't gone down that path?
When I was growing up, I would have been a zookeeper. I would have been, as I got older, I'd probably be a park ranger, maybe.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
But more recently, I'm a theater nut. I don't have an acting bone in my body, but everything I've learned about theater has made me think that if I had known this was an option when I was younger, I might have been a stage manager.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Kind of what I'm doing here in a way.
Right. Yes.
But anyway, that would have been something else I would have been happy to chase.
Sure. So in all the years you've been making wine, favorite vintage? Is there one that sticks out in your mind?
Well, it's interesting because I thought about it in two ways. One favorite vintage ever was 2001.
Okay.
It was we didn't even know it was such a great vintage at the time, but it was a long, cool season, which are always my favorites. But there was just something about the 01s that were just so majestic and beautifully, classically structured. They've aged beautifully. They're very pretty wines. So I'd have to say, if forced to choose, I would say 2001. I think your question was, what would you do over?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, doing a vintage over is kind of meaningless in a way. One of the wonders of making wine is that every year is different, and wine is one of those things that can speak of time and place, and
Sure.
then go forward into time, carrying on that same conversation, and that's really magical. So I wouldn't really want to repeat a vintage just because I liked it. But I got to thinking that we've learned a lot about canopy management. It
Right.
was starting to happen when I was at Davis in the 70s, in Australia, New Zealand, and at UC Davis. And I think most of after our equipment got better and more gentle, I think most of the amazing increase in quality of wines worldwide really
Mm-hmm.
has come because we've learned so much about the way the vines grow and managing the canopy. And specifically for me, growing Cabernet Sauvignon on the bench here, the Rutherford bench, which is just our jargon for alluvial fans, is that I've learned so much personally about managing that canopy in a way that allows me to pick fully ripe grapes at lower sugars.
Okay.
And that allows me, that's part of the elegance thing. I want these wines to be moderate in alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
They're all under 14%, with the exception of the 17, which inched over to 14.2. I've never de-alcoholized a wine in my life. So the grapes have got to come in structured for
Sure.
that. And it's really I'm still learning about canopy management. And so if I look back at really early vintages, like, for instance, the 1988 was the one that came to mind. It was a vintage that had difficult weather at flowering. It was rainy and cold. So a couple of things happen. When that happens, you get a crummy set, so low crop, but you get a really uneven set. So instead of setting over a week, or days, you set over weeks. And so going forward, those grapes are not uniformly ripe. And when they're all green, they all look the same. You can't see the
Right.
difference. When they're all black after veraison, you can't see the difference. So the way we deal with that is we go through veraison and we draw fruit that is lagging behind. It hasn't turned black.
Oh,
So
okay.
we can go through it, and we do that every year. But some years it's more important. In years that are pretty even already, we're just tweaking it. But in years where there's a lot of variability, it's extremely important to the quality of the ultimate wine. And so, for instance, in 88, I think if I knew what I knew now about canopy management, I could have gotten those grapes. We did have fairly uniformly ripening grapes. We dropped the green fruit. That
Mm-hmm.
was very difficult to do when you already have a small crop.
Oh gosh, yes.
But what I didn't understand as well was the canopy management throughout the ripening season. And so I think that wine, I probably could have made a better wine knowing what I know today. So
Okay.
that's when I would revisit.
Okay, awesome. So you've mentioned elegance more than once, probably 3 times now. Is that how you describe your winemaking style?
Well, it's how I tell you what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
My goal is to make Cabernet that's powerful and elegant. I want it to grace the table. It's table wine. I want to keep the table in table wine.
Yep.
I want it to have a long, interesting life, and that is very much associated with the way it's built, its structure. And I want it to speak of place. I want it to speak of where it grew.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's what I'm trying to do, and that's what I've been chasing my whole life.
Well, I think you've done a great job. I mean, I really do. I mean, year after year after year, I would say consistency is probably key in your wines. I mean, I just tasted a 2016. I popped open 2018. I mean, they're all right there. You know, you're going to have those vintages that, in your mind at least, somebody who's a neophyte probably wouldn't be able to tell as much, but you would know more than we would. But to us, it's consistent year over year.
Yeah, and I think I've become known for that, and I think there are several reasons for that. One, I've been incredibly lucky as a winemaker to make wine from the same grapes now, basically, for 35 years. That's a gift.
Oh, sure.
So stylistically, I'm trying to do exactly the same thing I was trying to do 35 years ago. I hope I've gotten better at it. and I've had the luxury of a very consistent grape style. So I don't really have any excuses. You know, I can't make the wine any better than the grapes that come in the door. And we live in a place that reliably ripens Cabernet
Yes.
beautifully. So I can't make it any better than the grapes that come in the door, but I can blow it.
Oh,
So the
right.
onus is on me.
So Kronos Vineyards, 50 years old this year.
50 years old. It was
And
planted
when
in 1971.
okay, and when did you purchase them?
We we closed escrow the last day in 95,
95.
1995. So it
Okay.
was already a mature vineyard. It wasn't really old. It was a quarter century old. It was
Mhm.
mature. And now fast forward more than a quarter century, it's 50 years old this year, which is another huge gift for me.
Sure.
I never got the business memo, much to um, that's been an issue over time. I just want to make great wine. So
Right.
Kronos Vineyard has given us 1.25 tons the acre. That's an
Oh my gosh.
26-year average. So there's no way you can charge enough to make up that difference, because
Right.
we planted to everything modern. This vineyard could give me 3 to 5 tons to the acre instead of 1.25, and I
Wow.
would still be able to make world-class wine.
Yeah.
So but I those old vines are so wise, and they make
Mhm.
it's St. George rootstock and Clone 2 Cabernet, which nobody's used for since the early 70s,
Wow.
really, until now. They're popular again, but they promote scraggly clusters of little tiny berries.
Mhm.
So the yield is very low, but the wines are incredible.
Concentration. So how long do you think those vines could last before you have to do the inevitable?
Well, I don't think it's inevitable. I hope
Really?
we're starting our second 50 years.
Wow.
Um, Several things have changed since we bought it. It had been watered really badly. It had been watered shallowly and frequently.
Oh
And so all
wow.
the roots, even though it's St. George rootstock, which is known for being deeply rooted, all the roots were growing up near the surface because that's where the water was.
Okay.
So it took years to force those roots back down where they belong by watering infrequently and deeply. So now I can dry farm this vineyard 2 out of 3 years.
Wow.
Um, and I have been working with a pruning consultant that you may have heard of, Seminate and Search, out of Italy. They consult all over the world to top houses all over the world, and it's all about promoting the longevity of vines. So we've been regenerating these old vines,
Wow. Okay.
and it's been really, really very exciting. So people will generally knock vineyards down because they don't bear very well anymore. I'm already accepting ridiculously low yields.
Sure.
and
Yeah.
and if anything, I've been able to nudge them up a little bit with the new pruning. When I say nudge it up, I'm talking maybe 1/4 ton to the acre,
Sure.
but yeah, I see no reason in the world. And that's another thing that a small family farmer can do. A
Right.
big farmer wouldn't even think about nursing these wonderful old vines along.
What's your annual output as far as number of cases, and are you happy where that's at, other than it would be nice to get a little more from Kronos maybe, but are you happy with where you're at, or boy, it'd be
That's a
nice to have another
question
10 acres?
that's a question I'm asked all the time. We only make 2,500 to 3,000 cases, depending on what Ma Nature sends us.
Okay.
Um, Nobody knows how small we are. That's really,
Yeah.
really small. But it's been really important for me to keep it small. One, to be able to wrap myself around it,
Hmm.
because I make the wine. I don't hire out the winemaking. Um, and also because like I said before, I wear so many different hats here at the winery to keep all the balls in the air. And over the last 30 years, I've raised 2 beautiful daughters. So I've had to keep it small. And now I'm of a certain age that if it were only up to me and not a bigger family consideration, I would stop buying grapes altogether and just make our 2 estate wines.
Wow.
As a, you know, if it were just me,
Right. Sure.
most people have retired by now. And I have no intention of retiring. I want to make Cabernet I want to make wine when I'm 99.
Awesome.
But I would like to give away some of the other things, you know.
Sure. Other responsibilities.
Some of the hats I could do
Right.
without.
Right.
So anyway, so I love being this small.
That's great. That's great. A lot of people struggle with that in any industry. You know, it's always tempting to be the next big thing or just to reach out a little bit more and think there's more money coming in. But obviously, with growth comes problems, comes headaches, comes more expenses. I like that. And you know, when we started our journey 12 years ago, we particularly started reaching out to wineries that we felt were smaller or more intimate, family owned. We didn't go with the big guys necessarily because there's a story to tell there, right? And I think in this competitive world of wine, the reason we got into blogging was people, oh, what's a good bottle of wine? Well, you know, you can go to the grocery store and get a $20 bottle of whatever, but we like searching out these wineries, whether we know they're new or they've been around 50 years, and discovering wines that, my gosh, this is something you may not have heard of. This is something that may not be on your radar because it's not in every store, but those are the wines we have come to discover and absolutely love. And a lot of them are like you, 3,500, 6,500 cases, and which is obviously small in scale, but it's the ones that mean so much to us. And it's more that personal feeling and personal touch, which with each bottle that goes into it. So I can definitely appreciate the 3,000 cases or less.
At some point, a top wine reflects the hand of the person that makes it. I've often said that really good wine can be made by committee, but great wine cannot be made by committee.
That's awesome. That's well said. So if you, for some reason, weren't making your wine, something, God forbid, happens, or I know you're not going to retire until you're 99.
I'm not going to live forever.
Right. But who would you pick to make your wine? Is there anybody you're like, I like their style, I think they would continue what I'm trying to do here and not just, you know, put out something?
Well, I haven't gotten that far in my thinking.
Okay.
Except to say it would be someone who knows and loves the wines of the world and understands where Corison fits in that. Because I think that's been important to me, to fully understand where we belong in the world of wine. Mm-hmm. It would be somebody that loved wine and not just Cabernet. It would be, I hope it would be a woman. Mm-hmm. But that wouldn't be absolutely necessary. We've been doing this long enough now. We have 2 daughters in their 20s, and that's still a huge work in progress. We don't really know what's going to happen, but we do know that both daughters are interested in the continuity of Corison Winery.
Okay.
So if one of them were to make the wine, that would be wonderful.
Right.
Or I find somebody else with similar sensibilities that understands what I'm doing. This wine is made in my head, kind of. And so it's got to be it's a stylistic concept in a way, mm-hmm. that then needs to be made alive. Yeah.
Right.
So the answer is I don't know, but that's what I would hope for.
Awesome.
My wine, my winery, my label.
Sure, absolutely.
Is to see it go forward into time.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Because in Europe there are wineries that make great wine that are working on their 5th generation. Gosh, so we can do it.
Yes, of course.
You know, it's not, our culture isn't very good at that, I'm afraid, but
right.
But I think it's worth at least trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. That's absolutely. So let's talk about winemakers a little bit. New, young, rogue winemakers, hot shots. Are they a flash in the pants? Are they going to leave a footprint? Is it something, are they coming up? Are they doing anything new that you're like, we've already tried that, or it's been done, and now you're developing some people might call, which I hate the term, cult wines. Is this going to come and go, or is this something that, hey, these people really came out of college knowing a lot more than I ever thought I would?
Well, my colleagues and I were the young guns once,
Sure.
and
Yep.
I came into this industry when the Napa Valley was just vibrating with excitement and promise and huge learning curves. If I got out of school today, it would be likely that I wouldn't be able to afford to live here.
Sure.
Napa Valley was poor when I got here.
Gosh.
It's hard for people to understand that.
Right.
But that said, California is a very diverse place.
Mm-hmm.
Climate and soils. There's probably a little as anything you could ever want out there. So if I were to come out of school today, I'm pretty sure I would wind up somewhere else.
Okay.
I might train here, but then go look for something that was more affordable. So I think it's downright exciting. I love the wines of the world. I taste widely and perhaps even wildly. The reason I make Cabernet Sauvignon isn't because I think it's any better than any other variety or more interesting to make. It's because I live in the Napa Valley, and I think we can make Cabernet Sauvignon as well or better than any place in the world. That said, there are too many great varieties to count. They evolved where they evolved with their climate, their soils, the people, the culture, the food. So California to me it's a big place, it's a diverse place. I think there's amazing potential for world-class wines to be made here. So I think, some of those young guns are going to be the old guns that were successful someday, It's thrilling to watch.
Yeah. What is the best way to tell your story or to get someone to try your wines with all the competition out there? I mean,
but again, you won't hear many of us talking about competition because
right.
No one could do what I do.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess competition wasn't the right word, but there's so many opportunities out there for someone to, hey, I want to try a great Napa Cab. Who doesn't love a Napa Cab? What makes them try yours versus the guy down the street?
Well, I'm very fortunate standing here today, having made wine in the Napa Valley for 45 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's hugely helpful. It takes a long, long time. So and it's changed. If I were doing the same thing I did even 10 years ago, from a marketing and sales standpoint, I'd be dead in the water. So getting the word out takes time, it takes energy. You often don't see an immediate result. It's really dropping a pebble in the ocean, and that little wave travels all the way around the world and then comes back.
Right.
You do that long enough, and we're very fortunate. Specifically, Corison is very fortunate to have a place on the highway. So we do get lots of visitors, and we take very good care of them, and it gives them a chance to find out what we're about. They're tasting on this little fancy family farm, not fancy farm, family farm. It's not fancy. The winery's a barn. We're farmers.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I would say it's mostly time. I mean, you don't make one wine, and the wine business is a very long-term thing. And I'm really glad I started it in my 20s because it took a long, long time.
It's definitely a marathon, not a sprint, for sure.
Yeah.
So, favorite varietal, I assume, is Cabernet Sauvignon to work with.
No. Like I said, I make Cabernet Sauvignon because I think this land can do that better than, or as well as, or better than any place in the world.
Sure.
Not just California. But like I said, I love the wines of the world. A variety that I miss terribly, I made the wine at Chapelet. It is a 30,000 case winery. And back in the day, we made Riesling, we made Chenin Blanc, we made Gamay. There was a lot of these varieties have disappeared from Napa today. But there was a block of old Chenin Blanc on terraces above the Chapelet's house
Mm-hmm.
that made the most amazing. To this day, it's still a famous wine because it was such a special vineyard. It's not there anymore, but I can't say that's my favorite variety make, but I miss
You
making
miss it. Yeah.
Chenin Blanc.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously you're a pioneer. Everyone knows you're a pioneer. I mean, first woman winemaker, owner, label, having your label in the Napa Valley. Is that correct?
Right. I wasn't the first woman winemaker, but I think it was the first to have my own label.
Okay. So coming up as a young winemaker, which as you were paying your dues, who did you look up to? Who did you say, I love their style?
It's interesting that you should mention that because people ask me who mentors have been. And historically, I would say, well, I think it's the wines of the world have been my mentor.
Mm-hmm.
But I just, in the last 6 months, have started to realize, maybe a year, how important Zelma Long was. When I got to the Napa Valley, she was basically the winemaker at Mondavi. Very
Oh,
important
wow.
winery, big winery.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing amazing research that they were sharing with everybody. And it's only recently, with all the mentoring that's going on, and I'm doing a lot of that, but the more we're all thinking a lot about that. And I never worked with her. I was one of the only women that never actually worked with her. So I wouldn't have called her a mentor in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But just having her there, I realize is really important to me.
Okay. That's great. So daily at night, you're drinking some of your wine. Do you prefer it with food or without food?
Oh, these wines scream for food.
Scream for food. Okay.
Yeah.
All
No,
right.
this is, I mean, you can have a glass of Cabernet. My Cabernet is pretty friendly. You can
Yes.
have that as a cocktail, but that's not really what I'm making it for. I'm making it for lamb.
Right. What are you drinking these days? I mean, besides your own, are you drinking any of your neighbors? Are you drinking anything that might surprise us?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier that I taste and drink widely
Right.
and drink the wines of the world. There is always a Mosel in my refrigerator.
Okay.
And for the last 10 years, I've just been on a crazy Barolo jag. I drink
Really?
a lot of Barolo.
Okay.
Italian wines in general. First, it
Mm-hmm.
was Tuscan wines, and I still love Tuscan wines
Mm-hmm.
um, for a lot of the same reasons. And the reason I love the wines of Italy is that they are what I'm chasing. They're both powerful and elegant. When they're great, they're pretty, they're elegant, but they're serious, big, powerful wines.
Sure.
It's this wonderful yin and yang.
Mm-hmm. So I walk in your personal wine cellar. Is there a bottle back there you're saving for a special occasion that something might surprise me?
Oh, I don't know if it would surprise you, but I had the great good fortune. One of my a friend and barrel supplier gave me a bottle of Lafite from my birth
Oh
year
gosh.
that I'm still.
Oh my goodness.
I've got to drink it soon. There's no reason to wait. I don't
Yeah.
know what I'm waiting for.
Right. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What do you do besides wine? Your harvest is over. Do you do anything outside of the wine? Or surely there's a hobby. There's
Absolutely.
something.
A lot of hiking, a lot of cross-country skiing,
Oh wow.
hiking. I was backpacking on my 68th birthday this last summer.
No kidding. Wow.
Um, I love theater, and one of the biggest heartbreaks of the pandemic was that theater shut down everywhere. It's just starting to open up again.
Right.
That's very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So the
I
pandemic.
cook.
You
I
cook.
was always a competent cook, but I wouldn't say I was a good cook. But for maybe 10 years now, I've taken that more seriously. It always seems like it was a lot like winemaking, but I had never taken it very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that as well.
Well, that's great. That's fantastic. Let's talk about the pandemic. I mean, obviously it's still here and we're still feeling the effects of it. The wineries were shut down for tastings for what seemed like forever. Actually, we
On and
postponed a
off.
trip. How did we flip the switch? Did you get into more virtual tastings? Did we try to up the online sales, club memberships? I mean, obviously Some people are
All of the
still
above.
digging out. It's just all the above.
All of the above. When we were open in 2020, it was the middle of winter, and we have some nice spaces. We have a covered crush pad
Mm-hmm.
that we bought some fire pits and some nice wool blankets,
Mm-hmm.
and we would hold. And if it wasn't windy, if the rain wasn't coming in sideways, it was a lovely place to taste with a blanket, wrapped in a blanket in front of a fire. So,
Mm-hmm.
we were creative that way. We weren't indoors for probably a year and a half. Um, Masking, of course, was very important. Being sure people were vaccinated was
Mm-hmm.
when that became an option, was very important.
Mm-hmm.
And then from a sales standpoint, we were very relieved after a month or so in realizing that people were drinking fancy wine, and they were drinking a lot of it.
Right.
People were
Sure.
stuck at home. They weren't traveling. They weren't going out to nice restaurants, but they were buying nice wine. So we had already gotten so that we would become fairly competent at email offerings to our wine list and our mailing list and our club. And we just upped that. We started sending out offers every 5 days. It was a huge job, but it worked. So we actually, our sales were, wholesale fell off the edge of the earth, but it was mostly made up by direct to consumer sales.
No kidding.
So we came through, thank goodness, just fine.
Now, have you felt the effects like most other businesses have of labor shortages, supply pricing, all that? It's
all of the above.
okay.
It's terrifying.
Yes.
I'm right now trying to finalize all my bottling supplies for next June, because there are already rumblings of supply chain issues with corks, with bottles. So that's terrifying.
Yeah.
We don't have our own bottling line. It comes in on a semi truck, and
Right.
so
Sure.
it's been scheduled for more than a year. So it's not something that's flexible. We need to be ready to bottle when we need to bottle. So there's that, and of course, labor is just extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It has been for years. It was already very difficult.
Wow.
But it's the pandemic made it quite a bit worse.
Sure. Yeah. Everyone's definitely feeling those effects. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes here.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. You've been called a national treasure. You've been called one of the greatest producers of Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa Valley. You've been called one of Napa Valley's most thoughtful winemakers. And you've previously been given the nod as one of the 10 female California winemakers to watch. And while all these words are flattering and very deserving, these accolades aren't for the faint of heart. How do you respond to that? How do you respond to these gushing honors and these wonderful things people are saying about you? Does that create more pressure to stay on top of the game, or do you look at it as like, I'm just doing what I'm doing, and I appreciate people thinking of me that way?
All of the above. First of all, we make wine for people to enjoy.
Right.
So it's very, very gratifying to know that people enjoy the wine. I mean, that's why we do it.
Sure.
And then I've got to say that I'm only as good as the last wine I made too.
Mm-hmm.
So very gratifying. Been a lot of ups and downs on many levels on this journey, and it's just very gratifying. It feels like it's been worth it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, that's well deserved by. I mean, I did a little research, obviously, and I there's always something, whether it's a Jancis Robinson or someone else. Somebody's always coming up with something. I'm like, they hit the nail on the head. I mean, they really, absolutely did. Let's talk about the last 5 vintages. Obviously, 2017 fires, 2018. I joke around with people, and obviously I know winemaking is not easy, but I tell people if you couldn't make a great Cabernet in 2018, switch grapes. 2019,
switch jobs.
Right. 2019, although it sounds like probably similar as far as success and wine. 2020, the horrible glass fire, which obviously destroyed not just crops, but a lot of historical structures and wineries. It sounds like when we were in Napa a couple months ago, 2021 is looking great again. So specifically 2017 and 2020, even though the fires weren't right around your property, your wineries, how does that affect you as far as getting grapes in early, if that's such a thing, dumping grapes, or just
I'll
switching
talk
gears.
about those two vintages for me.
Okay.
17, because I pick earlier than many, um, our grapes had been in for 2.5 weeks
Oh,
when the glass fire, not the glass fire, the what did they call it? The fire that ran over to Santa Rosa, and
sure.
that's where most of the damage was done. And then
Right.
in the hills of Napa Valley, but the Napa Valley proper wasn't as affected by 17.
Mm-hmm.
We were affected by the smoke. So I was I've never been more grateful that I picked so early, because the wines were finished fermenting. They were in barrels when that fire broke out.
Wow.
The real challenge in 17 nobody talks about was we had the biggest heat spell ever recorded in the Napa Valley in early
No kidding.
September. So that was the biggest challenge for me. I was already scheduling picking. I was already picking when I saw the 10-day forecast, and I sat down and I didn't get up until I had scheduled 9 straight days of picking, which is excruciating. I hate night picking, but I did night picking for I think 3 nights, and I've always prided myself in getting everybody a day off a week. I wasn't able to do that. It almost killed me because I've never missed a pick. I'm at every single pick. So when I was at said night pick, I also had to be here all day. So I think we're still reeling from that. It became kind of a rescue mission. It was a good, nice ripening season. There was nothing wrong with the grapes. It's just I had to get them off the vine, and I did. Right. And so it was a little bit of a rescue mission, and I'm delighted with the 17s. They're really pretty wines, really beautiful. Great. But that's one of those vintages that I'm extremely proud of because it was so difficult. Then 20, on the other hand, same issue with picking early. Mm-hmm. All the grapes were in, again, almost 2 weeks before the glass fires broke out. But the glass fires weren't a long way away. They were a St. Helena fire, Calistoga and a St. Helena fire. It was burning on both sides of the valley, both sides right next to us for weeks. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge for me in 2020 was we picked really early, but there had been a fair amount of smoke. So the local lab could analyze for smoke markers. So we analyzed the grapes before we picked them. We also did micro ferments. So we picked grapes a week or so before we intended to pick and fermented them because the volatile phenols would hook onto the sugars. And then after fermentation, they could be liberated again. So you could think you didn't have a problem, but you did. So we did mini ferments. Both the grapes and the micro ferments showed very low markers. So I went ahead and picked. And again, I'm not sure what I would have done anyway. That's what I do. Is I make wine during that time of the year. But I'm extremely relieved to say that I'm 98% sure that it's going to go in the bottle next June.
Okay.
The markers are still extremely low. It's a beautiful vintage. It was very small. And I'm so grateful because through no fault of anybody else, that the grapes were still out there when the fires broke out. Smoke effect. There are a lot of people that will not have a 2020.
Right. Yeah, we learned that as well. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. So obviously there's skill to winemaking, but I mean, some days there's dumb luck too. Correct. I mean, and that's why it isn't all farming.
Great vintages are dumb luck,
Right.
I mean, it's, my favorite vintages are the longest, coolest. You mentioned 18. 18 was nearly a perfect vintage.
Yeah.
It was so long and cool that I picked 2 weeks later than normal. And August especially was almost cold. It got into the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And so long, cool season, no rain to cause any trouble, no fires to cause any trouble.
Sure.
So regardless of your style that year, you can waltz in and pick the grapes right where you wanted them. Wow. So that's luck.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I feel like we deserved it by then.
You absolutely deserved it. My gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. So innovation, you sustainably farm. Let's talk about the going green, recycling, composting, reducing the carbon footprint. Extremely important things to do. What's the next opportunity? Is it better packaging, better bottling, something with the barrels? What's the next thing that will really help reduce that?
Well, sustainability has been a core value from the very beginning. We
Mm-hmm.
have farmed Kronos Vineyard organically since the day we owned it, and that was way before it was fashionable.
Sure.
So that's a core. We also are lucky enough to have built the winery fairly recently. It's built it in '99, so now it's 20 years old, a little more. But we were able to build it with sustainability in mind. And then we had to re-roof a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't afford a standing seam metal roof in the early days.
Yep.
The cheap roof blew off. And so we re-roofed a couple of years ago with standing seam, and that allowed us to put on photovoltaic glass collectors that
Oh, wow.
my husband found he designed the winery, and it's gorgeous. And the green roof was very important to him. And he found a company in Barcelona, of all places. They sell photovoltaic glass all over the world to architects, because architects are able to make things beautiful with it instead of just plopping a black collector. So he was able to get our photovoltaic panels, they're glass, and they're the color of the roof.
Oh,
So
wow. No kidding.
it's really cool. And so now we're completely solar. We're working toward all electric vehicles. We're literally waiting for our electric forklift to show up.
No kidding.
We're every step of the way, we're looking to reduce paper.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really need to print very much in today's world. And all of us that didn't grow up attached to a computer have had to kind of learn how to, switch over to digital. It's just always been a core value. So coming up, it's taking advantage of the fact that we have enough electrons coming from the sun to run this whole winery, even during harvest when the loads are huge for chilling. And we're very nearly carbon neutral.
There was an article the other day, and I don't know if it was Wine Enthusiast or who it was, talking about bottle weight and how the bottle weight doesn't necessarily mean that it's a quality wine inside, and only, I think, 25% of glass in the United States is recycled. And somebody, I don't know if it was you or somebody, had commented on social media about that. Like, yeah, that makes sense. So is that a huge opportunity? I mean, there's some bottles we get from Napa, and it's all you can do with two hands to pick them up.
You can't tell when it's empty.
You're right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. When we made our choice, gosh, it's, over 30 years ago, I made a conscious decision not to go with the big heavy glass. And so our bottle was patterned after what it was originally in an Italian bottle called Elite Leggera, which meant light. So we chose in the very beginning, 30 some years ago, a light bottle. It's since been knocked off, and it's made by many companies now.
Sure.
I've bought that bottle shape probably in 4 or 5 different companies for all different reasons over the years. But it's a very light Bordeaux bottle.
Nice.
And so that's just always been a core value for us.
Okay. So let's talk about the 2018. Give me some, give me, yes, there's a little bit missing, as you can see. Give me your thoughts on this. If somebody were to want to know more about this particular bottle, which again was an amazing vintage, how would you describe it to them?
Well, I can tell you what I want it to taste like.
Okay.
I want it to be very complex. Here on the Rutherford bench, we're actually in St. Helena, just over the line from Rutherford. But here on the bench, the grapes have the potential to have an amazing breadth of flavor. Cabernet Sauvignon can produce fruit flavors all the way from what I say red and blue to purple and black. So cherries, blueberries, to plums, to cassis, to blackberries, say.
Right.
And one of the things I love about picking earlier, and one of my goals is to pick early enough that I still have that red and blue end of the spectrum.
Mm,
It's there with the purple and black as well. And if you have all those flavors, it's complex. And that's
sure.
one of the goals, is to have lots of flavor there. And the bright red and blue end of the spectrum, I believe, is what turns into floral perfume in the bottle for
Hmm.
bottle bouquet. So that's very important to me. It's very important that my wines be aromatic. And I think growing grapes carefully on the Rutherford bench gives me that. What else? How
Well,
would I
this,
describe it?
yep,
I want these wines are tannic,
yep.
but the tannins that are there they feel like velvet.
Hmm.
So my wines are very approachable when they're first released. The tannins are soft. You measure the tannins, you get a really big number, but the tannins feel good. So we don't need to cellar for 20 years for the tannins to
Sure.
settle down. So I like the tannins. I love the complexity, and I love the aromatics, the floral perfume
Sure.
that all vintages have. Sometimes it's at the get-go. I think the 18 has a little bit of that already, but they all develop a beautiful floral perfume with time in the bottle.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Well,
want
it,
them to have good tart balance, because I want them to be refreshing. I want them to go with
right.
food. I
Hmm.
want them to be moderate in alcohol. Those are all the things that I hope you find in that bottle.
Absolutely. Well, the 2006 is over here. 2016 is the behind me, and it was beautiful. We've obviously had two of the three bottles in the wooden case, and the biggest problem we have when we buy these wines is, and I tell this with every winery we buy wines from, is I would love to put them away for a while. I would just love to every 2 years, 5 years try one, but it just never happens. It really doesn't.
I love it that you drink them.
Sure.
Wine is for drinking.
Yep.
If no one ever pulls the cork, did I ever even make the bottle of wine?
That's a great way of looking at it. And back in the day, we probably had a small, I would say, gathering, not necessarily collection, and we still have some, old ports that we still have back in the wine fridge or whatever. But it's just too difficult, and I look at it that way too. I'm like, you know what? If I don't enjoy it today, then what if I'm not here tomorrow to enjoy it? So that's it.
And
That's
I
why we look at
promise
it.
I'll make more.
Well, we hope that you do. Well, this has been enlightening. It really has. And this has been a great way for us to get to know more about you and the winery and the wines. Obviously, we have driven by the property. We couldn't schedule last time. It was a scheduling conflict, but when we come out next August, I hope we can continue the conversation and sit down and taste through the wines and keep this going. This has been a lot of fun for us today.
I look forward to that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cathy. Have a great day. We'll talk to you
Thank
soon.
you. You too.